people of Lithuania and Ukraine have a long shared history. Centuries ago, they even formed one of Europe's biggest countries together. And more recently, in the last 25 years, both have had revolutions. But the revolution's results have proved very different. Lithuania, for example, started 2015 as part of the Eurozone, with a reviving economy and plans to beef up its NATO presence. Ukraine, however, started the year with a war raging in its east, a bankrupt economy, and over 500,000 Ukrainians refugees in their own country. So why did these countries' paths turn out so differently? And how close did Lithuania come to the same fate as Ukraine? To understand the difference, we have to first understand what happened in Lithuania. On March the 11th, 1990, Lithuania declared its independence from the Soviet Union. Negotiations with Moscow on recognition of the state continued until, in January 1991, the Soviet Union sent in armed forces to put down the People's Revolution.
That night, 14 people were killed and more than 1,000 injured. I was one of those students who stood among many other 1,000 people who stood that night and many other nights afterwards in front of the parliament building.
The Lithuanians fought back with songs.
When I say defending, this defense consisted mainly of singing songs, praying the rosary or erecting the barricades.
This may look like just another sing-song, but this in fact is a key part of the Lithuanian struggle for independence. When the tanks rolled into Vilnius over 20 years ago, the advice from the independence leader was sing. Sing, no fighting, no aggression, just sing.
The person who gave that advice was the independence leader Vytautas Landsbergis. For him, this wasn't a struggle to take on the whole Soviet system. It was simply the Lithuanians saying they no longer wanted to live in the Soviet bloc, an arrangement which had been decided without them under the Nazi-Soviet pact 50 years beforehand.
If you want to keep on Soviet Union, it's your business. We are independent in spirit, in law, in international law, in our rights, and we are doing it.
Instead of following its new open glasnost approach, Moscow gave Lithuania a traditional and severe reproach. When the Soviet forces attacked Lithuania in 1991, they headed for the parliament as well as the TV tower and studio. Their aim was to take down both those who stood for freedom and their voices. Eglia Buchalite was broadcasting to the nation that night as the violence unfolded.
This is the studio that Aglia was broadcasting from that day in 1991. And this is the door that the Soviet forces kicked down.
I do not think anybody was thinking about their personal safety at that time. The only moment when it wasn't clear whether I will survive or I will be killed were those minutes when I saw those soldiers in uniforms who were wearing masks and walking in corridors of our broadcasting building, and I was sitting in the studio. There was a thought that occurred to me, whether this is the end of my life and how simple and unexpected everything may end.
This was a key moment. Control of information was fundamental to the Soviets, especially in fighting the revolution.
Soviet times were terrifying. I could listen to the anthem only through the American radio channel. We would find a Lithuanian transmission on radio. When the anthem was being playing, I would put it on the highest volume so it could be heard in the whole house.
Lietuvos himną radiją pasukdavau visą laiką, kad skambėtų visam name.
The premises of this television was occupied by a military television which was making broadcasts of a completely opposite information, a Russian propaganda which would make us laugh today if nothing would be happening in Ukraine. In fact, we see the same thing.
The attack on the TV stations led to 14 deaths. But soon, Soviet tactics escalated to something even more sinister.
On July the 31st, 1991, there were 8 men working in this customs hut on the Lithuanian border. The hut was suddenly ambushed by Russian forces who came from the woods. Those forces were wearing sneakers so as not to be heard as they approached the hut. They burst into the hut and forced all 8 men who were working here onto the floor, in this patch here, and then one by one shot each in the back of the head, execution style, with a silenced gun. These 7 men, some of them as young as 20, all died instantly. There was only one survivor who can still tell the story today, and that man is Thomas Cernas.
This place resembled the Ukrainian Maidan, but nobody was singing here. We had to work, and there were no crowds like in front of the parliament, just 7 to 8 people situated by a forest without any means of telecommunication. When I was working, I was sitting behind that writing desk. It was an early morning, approximately 2 hours till sunrise. The trailer was standing where those crosses are placed now. I heard a strange noise, I raised my eyes from a writing desk, and I saw a man running and holding a gun. They were Russians who were wearing Russian military uniforms which didn't have any distinctive signs, and they were without military shoes. They were just wearing sneakers. This allowed them to sneak in silently during the night. The lights were turned off. We were told to lay down on the ground. When they started shooting, there was almost no sound, so they died silently. A gun had a silencer, so there was no sound of a shooting. They didn't say anything. They were only killing people by shooting them in their heads. The same was done to me.
The attack took place on Lithuania's border with Belarus, and even today, the mentalities on either side of the border remain starkly different.
We're here on the Lithuanian border, Lithuania on this side and Belarus over there. But this is more than just a geographical divide. This is an ideological divide. On this side, the European Union. On the other side, what's been called the last dictatorship of Europe. And now we're going to show you what it's like.
Belarus has spent the 25 years since the end of the Soviet Union remaining a close ally of Russia, politically and economically. By not opposing Russia, it's benefited from cheap oil and gas deals. Ukraine, on the other hand, has been regularly punished since 1991 by Moscow if it made moves towards Europe. And the results are clear in the economy. Lithuania remembers getting similar treatment when it dared challenge Moscow before.
We were challenged in the beginning of the 90s. Maybe you do not remember, but I do. There were empty streets because there was no gas, no cars. It was winter time, I remember, and cold in the flats. It was kind of lesson to us because you would like to be independent, so okay, you can be independent. And this is a prize.
But Lithuania turned this to its advantage.
In these 8 months, we were able to turn our economy towards the West, and in 8 months, we started to trade with the West, practically 2/3 of our economy.
And today, Lithuania leads the calls for ensuring that sanctions are imposed on Russia for its actions in Ukraine, even though these sanctions hurt the Lithuanian economy.
Being next to Russia, we are suffering the most from the sanctions. Our agriculture sector or our transport sector, they are suffering every day, and despite that fact, we are still being one of the biggest proponents of the sanctions, because that's the only way how you can stop aggressions, how you can send very strong messages to Russian leadership.
The reaction of the authorities in Moscow has been similar to both Lithuania and Ukraine's uprising. And it may be because in both 1991 and today, the Russian economy was in trouble.
We realized very well that Soviet Union as such is bankrupting. And they realized. Therefore, they wanted to manipulate with some reforms, but how to save the empire.
Nationalism was a distraction, and it is the same today.
The economy is ruined frankly. No investments, no perspectives. In addition, oil prices even a bit improved, but not yet to the perfect, so to say, level. So situation is really bad. You can refer to the nationalism, but how many times you can do that? This channel Russia Today, or I'm calling Russia Yesterday, or Russian-speaking channels. This is terrible propaganda. Sometimes it's misinterpreted as a freedom of speech. If Goebbels was journalist, then I'm giving up.
But just as the attacks on both revolutions have been similar, so has the unity of the people fighting for those revolutions.
We have to stand together with the Ukrainian people, and not only we as Lithuanians, but I think the whole Europe has to stand together with the Ukrainian people, because what's happening in Ukraine is not only about Ukraine, as it wasn't not only about Lithuania.
2018 will be the 100th anniversary of Lithuania's Declaration of Independence, but 2015 is an important year too, because Lithuania joined the Eurozone. It's adopted the euro, and this is a new Lithuanian euro coin.
Sitting at the heart of the European Union is one thing, but Lithuania knows that convincing some of its European partners that compromising with Russian aggression doesn't work will be just as difficult.
Looking around, such as solid international institutions, big budgets, a lot of ambitions. In the 21st century, we can do nothing when European country invading other neighboring country, and we can do nothing, just statements of concern. Is it not strange for you? For me it is.
What is compromise? They are always, as in our case in 1990, they demanded capitulation, calling it compromise.
Landsbergis remembers that despite the Soviet Union making the right noises in public, behind the scenes, Lithuanian leaders were being threatened.
You will never be given your independence. They were words of Gorbachev to me. Be reasonable. It is unrealistic. Come to real matters. We will give you more autonomy. Now you are given 7% of your national income in currency. 7%. We will give you 20. Be happy. For every normal people, and for, why not 100%? It is our profit.
And for some, just engaging in talks over concessions for Russian aggression in Ukraine actually makes the situation worse.
I shouldn't say that we are responsible, because we are not attacking Ukraine. We are not invading that country. But by being passive or by being not consistent, we are implicitly contributing to the escalation.
Why we are talking today openly, and we see that what is ongoing is the Munich II, the sellout of Ukraine. I could remind the advice of one old woman in Lithuanian village. She said, boys, don't make even a little step back, because they will put their foot on this place when it was your feet.
And worse still, whilst the world unites against terrorism, some feel that terrorist tactics are now a Moscow tool.
If you have professional military without identification signs and the flag, how you call it? Of course it is professional, and we know that it is Russian professional military, but they behave as terrorists.
Victims are victims. If they are civilians, I'm always saying these examples because I took part myself in march in Paris, this Je suis for Charlie, and I marched together with all colleagues defending, freedom of speech. There were twice more victims per day than in Paris at that time. So maybe not correct to compare, because every victim is one too many.
And it is the ideology in the Kremlin that worries many the most. It reflects a resurgent nationalistic country, while the Kremlin says it needs to protect Russians wherever they are.
Russia is a state which has no borders. It is to be realized. Even as to Ukraine, they still suffer that there is a border between Baltic states and Russia. They don't have even with Estonia state border.
And it can even be as simple as saying that Russian speakers need protection.
But we have many English speakers everywhere in the world. And maybe the United Kingdom may come to India back. They are English speakers. Maybe they suffer.
Perhaps the different viewpoints are due to different definitions. For example, does democracy mean the same in Russia as it does in the West?
They have the special democracy. Their democracy is different. Specific Russian democracy, as they say.
In Western meaning, partnership is doing something together for common good, for common benefit. In Eastern and Russian understanding, partnership is a game in which your partner is to be put on his knees.
So what do Lithuanians recommend that the West do in the face of President Putin's aggression?
My advice is not to listen what he says. Look what he makes. Look at the action. They are still talking. Oh, what he said today, what he said yesterday. Where is difference?
The irony in the story is that Ukraine had its chance to turn to the West by signing an EU association agreement during Lithuania's EU presidency. Former Ukrainian President Yanukovych had the chance to break with the threats and aggression of an unpredictable Russian neighbour. But that's not how things worked out.
And it's that entrance behind me where the story comes full circle. It was there that the EU presidency that was held by Lithuania, the first Baltic state to have that presidency, had arranged for a meeting where the association agreement with Ukraine was going to be signed by former President of Ukraine, Yanukovych. He arrived but refused to sign the agreement under heavy pressure from the Kremlin, and it was that refusal that led to the Euromaidan protests.
Another irony is that a Lithuanian, Aivaras Abromovicius, is now Minister for Economic Development and Trade in the new Ukrainian government, which was formed after Ukraine's Russian-speaking ex-president Yanukovych ran away to live in Russia. By contrast, in Lithuania, the leaders and the people stayed united. But what would have happened if their common vision of a Lithuania in Europe had not held?
What do you feel that Lithuania's position today would be if it hadn't joined NATO?
You know, I don't even want to think about it. I only can thank God that decision of our nation 25 years ago was for the freedom, and we became the members of NATO and European Union, and for us it is a new chance of history, and we took it.
And so you have no idea about how events could have developed?
Don't even want to think about it.
And it is clear that the path that Lithuania took is possibly the only one that can guarantee the country's safety.
Again, recalling 2008 Georgia. They were not members of NATO, we have a result. Ukraine, big country in the middle of Europe. They are not members of NATO, we have a result. So this is a difference.
But the best measure of how safe Lithuanians feel is simply to ask them. So we did.
Do you feel that Lithuania is safe today?
I think yes.
Yes, still quite safe. Well, maybe not 100%, but...
Okay. And why is it safe?
Because we're in NATO.
Because you're in NATO?
Yes, I think so.
At least today I spoke with my parents and we said, thanks God, we're still not in such a situation and we're just happy for this moment, and I hope that it will not happen here, like in East.
Okay, I feel quite good. I know that the situation in the East is very difficult, but because of the NATO, I feel very good. Yeah, I remember the Soviet Union, and I am happy now that we are in the opposite side right now.
And what was the feeling in Lithuania when Ukraine's revolution and subsequent battles started last year?
I felt a pity for our other neighbors who practically lost these 25 years of their independence after Soviet system was collapsing. I meant Ukraine.
For some, it has gone beyond words of encouragement. For some Lithuanians, it has provided an opportunity to play a part in a bid for freedom that they missed in 1991. Jana Puodius has been helping volunteers fighting against Russian-backed rebels in Ukraine, from Donetsk to Debaltseve.
During the Ukraine, I started to understand what happened in my country, because I was very little, I didn't remember it. And it was just a history, I know it, we learned in the school and so on, but I didn't have real emotion about this, and in Ukraine I started to understand what happened in our country very deep.
And even for those who were around in 1991, Ukraine's battles have made them realize how close they came to the same fate.
Yes, this really reminds me of those days, and it strikes me that we are very lucky. I make a comparison with everything that is happening in Ukraine now. It wasn't easy, it was really hard. I cannot say that we have escaped from a Soviet Union easily, without any damages, without any sacrifices, but when I see what is happening now, how long it lasts and how much it costs, it is hard to believe, and I feel an endless joy that we didn't have such an ending in Lithuania and that we have been free for many years.
Lithuania provided many warnings about Russia to its European partners over recent years. But these warnings were often dismissed as being overcautious. Today, Lithuania can confidently say it called the situation right.
We're talking that 10 years ago that we need to look to Russia through the different angle, and now it seems that we are right about our understanding. We were right about our analysis, what's happening in Russia, about the processes, internal processes in Russia. And now I think that there's also additional argument why people in Europe now listen much more carefully to what we are saying.
And there are deeper lessons for us all, that freedom can never be taken for granted.
I think it was President Reagan who said that freedom is only one generation away from extinction, so every generation has to do its work.
Freedom is always contested, it's never granted.
And that the joy that comes from securing freedom should never be forgotten.
More than 10 years ago, we made the right decision to join NATO and European Union. This is the first point I would like to mention. And during that time I was defense minister. I remember the succession process. I remember all these emotions during the very day of membership when I was in Washington and I received a call from my duty officer that Belgian jets crossed our airspace and going to land in our airbase to conduct air policing. It was a couple hours before the moment of membership, so to say, literally speaking. It's very difficult even to explain what were the feelings. It was something very, very special, and these feelings are still quite strong.
I felt proud that we managed to do what we did in proper time, that we knew our neighbor and we knew what we need to do because of our knowledge of this neighbor, and that we are on the right side of history today. And for us, it is a huge luck for nation.
It's a luck that's not shared by Ukraine, at least not yet.